It was her 71st birthday, and for the first time in 5 years of agonizing silence, the phone rang. It was her daughter, inviting her to dinner. Hope, fragile and terrifying, brought her to the mansion gates. But when she arrived, she wasn't led to the dining room. She was casually sent to the kitchen, where the staff were waiting, with a passive-aggressive instruction to wait there. That devastating act of humiliation should have broken her spirit. Instead, it lit a slow, cold fire in her heart. This is the true story of a silent war fueled by wealth, betrayal, and a mother's quiet but absolutely stunning revenge.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
My name is Evelyn Monroe. I'm 71 years old. And what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. It came in the mail, like a whisper. A thick, ivory envelope, creamier than the usual junk I'd long since stopped bothering to open. My name was written in Danielle's handwriting, neat and restrained, like she always was. My hands trembled slightly as I turned it over. The gold seal of the Langford family crest caught the light like a cruel joke. An invitation. To dinner. From her. It had been 3 years, 3 birthdays, 3 Christmases. 3 unanswered voicemails I couldn't bring myself to delete. There were days I sat in my armchair by the window, staring at the only photo I kept on the mantel. The 3 of us. Danielle was just 10, her arms wrapped tightly around her father's neck. My late husband, Michael, smiling like he always did when she made a joke too smart for her age. That was the Danielle I raised. Before Manhattan, before Travis Langford, before the silence. I used to whisper to myself, "You can't live in this emptiness forever." But that night, holding the invitation in my hands, I felt something shift. Hope. Fragile, desperate hope. The kind you know better than to trust, but cling to anyway, because it's the only thing you have left. I pressed the invitation to my chest, right over the small pearl pendant Michael had given me the Christmas before he died. The only jewelry I still wore. It felt like maybe, just maybe, my daughter was finally reaching back. The dinner was scheduled for Friday night. Formal attire. Langford residence, Upper East Side. I spent hours choosing the right dress. Not too flashy. Nothing that screamed I was trying too hard. Just soft navy, with a shawl that brought out the silver in my hair. I dabbed on a bit of rouge, curled the edges of my thinning hair. Then, just before leaving, I reached for the pearl pendant. I stood in front of the mirror and whispered, "You'd be proud of her, Michael." That cab ride uptown felt longer than it should have. The city buzzed with its usual arrogance, horns blaring, lights flickering like they were trying to outshine the stars we never saw anymore. As we pulled up to the Langford building, a doorman in a tailored coat opened the door and gave me a look, somewhere between polite confusion and professional detachment. "Here for the Langford dinner?" he asked. I nodded, and he led me in like I was someone who still belonged in places like these. The elevator smelled like eucalyptus and money. My heart was louder than the soft jazz playing in the background. When the doors opened, Danielle was standing there. My daughter. Her silhouette sharp in a black cocktail dress, makeup flawless, arms crossed in that way she used to when she was trying to hide that she was nervous. "Mom?" she said, almost like a statement, not a greeting. "Danielle," I replied, taking a cautious step forward. She kissed the air beside my cheek. Cold. Behind her, the apartment opened like a magazine spread. Marble counters, gold accents, a skyline view that belonged on postcards. And then, laughter from deeper inside, glasses clinking, voices I didn't recognize. "We're just about to start," she said, smoothing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Come in." I followed her through the apartment, the heels of my shoes tapping against the floor louder than I liked. We passed an open kitchen where caterers dressed in black were arranging canapes with tweezers. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror above the fireplace. Small, slightly hunched, like I was shrinking inside this palace of coldness. Then I saw him. Travis Langford. He emerged from the hallway like a politician. Smile practiced, hands tucked casually in his pockets. He walked toward me and took my hand with a softness that felt wrong. "Evelyn, so glad you could join us," he said, voice slick as polished leather. "Thank you for the invitation," I managed. He leaned in slightly, too close, his breath warm. "You'll be more comfortable in the kitchen," he whispered, still smiling. My ears rang. Everything around me, the music, the voices, the clinking glasses, faded. I felt my fingers grip the pearl pendant at my neck so tightly that my knuckles went white. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. My daughter stood just behind him, eyes blank, mouth unmoving. "What?" I whispered. Danielle stepped forward, her voice clipped. "It's just... We've arranged a different setup. This is more of a formal dinner for Travis's business associates." I stood there, the heat rising from my neck to my face. Formal dinner, business associates, and I wasn't even family enough to sit at the table. "I see," I said quietly. A young woman appeared beside me, gesturing politely. "If you'll come this way, Mrs. Monroe," she said, leading me down a hallway I hadn't noticed before. I followed, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. The kitchen was silent, not the one where the caterers worked, but a smaller one, probably the staff kitchen. There was a small table set for one, a plate of food already laid out, still warm, a glass of water, a cloth napkin folded into a triangle. I sat down slowly, my knees creaking like old floorboards. I looked at the food. I didn't touch it. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed again. They had taken everything from me in that moment. Not just a seat at the table, but something far worse. My place in her life. I sat there, listening to the ticking of a nearby clock, counting every second of humiliation. And when I finally stood up to leave, I didn't say goodbye. I don't remember walking out that night. I only remember the cold. Not the air. It was still warm for early November. No, it was the kind of cold that settles into your chest when you realize something sacred has cracked and the pieces no longer fit. Back in my apartment, I peeled off the navy dress like it was someone else's skin. My feet ached. My heart numb. I left the pearl necklace on the bathroom counter and let the silence swallow me. For 2 days, I didn't move much. I watched the light shift across the floor, listened to the radiator groan like it too had things it couldn't say out loud. Every so often, I caught myself whispering Danielle's name. Not in anger, not even in sorrow, just her name. As if saying it might pull her back to the little girl who used to climb into bed with me after a nightmare. But little girls grow up, and sometimes they grow away. On the 3rd day, I did something foolish. I called her. I didn't expect her to answer. She didn't. But the beep invited me to leave a message, and for some reason, I did. "I know I wasn't what you needed the other night," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I still love you. I always will." I hung up. No tears. Just a hollow I couldn't name. A week passed before the second invitation arrived. This time it was an email from Danielle. Brief, polite, like a formal memo from a woman in finance. "Hi, Mom. Travis wanted to extend another dinner invitation. Friday, 7:30, hope to see you. It felt like a trap, but it also felt like a door. And after so many years of them being closed, I wasn't ready to walk away from this one. I wore the same dress, maybe out of stubbornness, or maybe because I wanted her to see that I hadn't broken. Not entirely. The doorman recognized me this time. "Good evening, Mrs. Monroe," he said, with a little more warmth. I nodded, not trusting myself to smile. Danielle opened the door herself again. She looked tired, not visibly, but deep in the eyes, the kind of exhaustion that concealer couldn't fix. "Hi, Mum," she said, stepping aside. Inside, everything looked the same marble, the same soft music, the same scent of white lilies. But this time I noticed more. I noticed the art had changed. Travis had swapped the abstract piece above the mantel with something bolder, an oil painting of the Manhattan skyline at night. Dominating, expensive, cold. The dining table was already set. 12 places, silver chargers, crystal glasses, plates so thin you could see the faint imprint of the designer logo on the underside. Guests were arriving. Men in tailored suits, women in sheath dresses and pearls. They all looked like they knew each other, like they'd all been laughing at the same joke for years, and I was late to the punchline. I tried to step toward the table, just to take my seat. Any seat. That's when it happened. Travis appeared again, perfect as ever, like he'd just stepped out of a GQ shoot. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Evelyn," he said smoothly, "we've arranged a more intimate setup for you. You'll be more comfortable in the kitchen." The words landed like glass shattering inside my chest. I froze. My hand instinctively found the pearl necklace again, fingers wrapping around it like a lifeline. I felt the joints in my knuckles tighten, the blood rushing from my face. I looked at Danielle. She wasn't looking at me. She was adjusting the flowers in the centerpiece, lavender hydrangeas. They used to be her favorite. Used to be mine, too. "How dare you think you belong at this table with my in-laws?" she said, still not meeting my eyes. Her voice low, cold. And just like that, the world tilted. I didn't protest. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. I just followed the same young assistant down the hallway again. The same staff kitchen. The same plate waiting. Only this time there wasn't even a folded napkin. I sat for a while, staring at the untouched food. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was something quieter, something heavier. A betrayal so deep it didn't have a sound. I remembered the nights Michael and I used to sit at our rickety kitchen table, splitting a can of soup and laughing about how Danielle had covered the walls in crayon. I remembered her first date, the way she burst into our room at midnight to confess he tried to kiss her, and she'd kicked him in the shin. I remembered staying up late to sew her prom dress when she said store-bought didn't feel special enough. And now, I was the one hidden in the kitchen. Like shame. I looked at the food again, picked up the fork, put it down. Then I stood up. No one stopped me on the way out. No one noticed. Outside, the air had turned colder than expected. Manhattan glittered like it always did, arrogant in its refusal to care. I walked for a while. My feet led me without direction, past bodegas and bars, past lovers arm in arm, past doormen hailing cabs for people who'd never know what it meant to be invisible. Eventually, I found myself at a familiar place, Riverside Park. There was a bench, our bench, the one Michael and I used to sit on in the early days, before mortgages, before cancer, before silence. I sat down, my hands in my lap, no tears, because this wasn't just sadness. It was a line drawn. I won't chase her anymore, I whispered to the wind. I have to find what's left of myself. And somehow, I believed it. The city pulsed around me, and just as I stood to leave, thinking this chapter had ended in shame, something caught my eye. A white envelope, sitting inside my mailbox the next morning. Not from Danielle, not from anyone I expected. Just a name I hadn't heard in 50 years. Henry Whitlock. The door clicked behind me. Soft. Final. I didn't wait for the elevator. I walked straight to the stairwell and began my descent, each step like a drumbeat pounding against my ribs. 12 flights. I didn't care. My legs could take the ache better than my heart could bear another second inside that apartment. The moment I stepped out onto the street, the cold hit me full in the face. Sharp, clean, almost holy. The sky had started to dust the city in snow. Flakes swirled through the air like a gentle apology for everything else the world was doing wrong. I didn't have a coat thick enough for it. Or maybe I just didn't have skin thick enough for this life anymore. I walked. Uptown, then downtown. Didn't matter. I wasn't trying to get anywhere. New York was dressed in holiday lights. Storefronts glittering with garlands and ribbons, couples arm in arm laughing, taxis honking as if the season couldn't slow them down. The city moved on, as it always did, indifferent to heartbreak. That's the thing about Manhattan. It doesn't stop. Not for love, not for loss, and certainly not for 71-year-old women who no longer belonged at their own daughter's table. I passed a boutique window and caught my reflection. Hair wind-blown, shawl askew, eyes rimmed in pain. I looked like someone who had been left behind, but more than that, I looked like someone who had let herself be. I ended up at Riverside Park again. My feet always seemed to find that bench, like it was the only place that remembered me. I sat, slowly, ignoring the chill that settled through the wood and into my bones. The river shimmered beyond, grey and still. A barge drifted in the distance, quiet, patient. My fingers found the pendant again, the pearl from Michael. My thumb rubbed against its surface out of instinct, comfort, maybe even prayer. I could almost hear his voice. "You still here, Ev?" I smiled. Just barely. I don't remember how long I sat there. Long enough for my toes to go numb. Long enough to forget what time it was. But I didn't cry. That was the surprising part. Not a single tear. I thought there would be sobs, maybe even rage. But what I felt wasn't just sadness. It was clarity. This wasn't just about being sent to a kitchen. This wasn't even about Travis or his cruel, silky words. This was about Danielle. About the moment she looked me in the eye and decided I wasn't worth defending. Not even worth seating at her table. And that was the moment I knew something was broken that couldn't be glued back together with apologies. "I can't keep chasing her love," I whispered into the wind. "Not if it means abandoning myself." The words sounded strange out loud, like they belonged to a woman braver than I'd ever been. But saying them made them real. Saying them turned shame into something else. Resolve. Eventually, I stood. My knees groaned in protest, but I straightened my back. I hailed a cab, realizing only then that I hadn't brought any cash. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, waved me in anyway. "Bad night?" he asked gently. I hesitated. Then, for the first time in a long while, I told the truth. "No," I said. "A necessary one." Back home, I undressed slowly. The dress went back on the hanger, the pendant back in its box. I sat at the kitchen table, mine, not theirs, and poured myself a cup of chamomile tea. And as I sat in the quiet hum of my own little apartment, something strange happened. I didn't feel empty. I felt grounded, Not whole, not yet, but solid, like the earth beneath my feet had stopped shifting long enough for me to stand again. The next morning, I slept in. No alarm, no purpose, just sunlight warming the edges of my blanket. Around noon, I heard the mailbox clatter open. Usually, I let it sit. Bills could wait. So could catalogues and senior discounts for stairlifts I'd never buy. But something nudged me. I opened the door. There it was. A single envelope. Thick, white. No return address. The kind of envelope that made your breath catch for no good reason. I turned it over. Typed letters. Formal font. Mrs. Evelyn Monroe, we've been trying to reach you regarding the estate of Mr. Henry Whitlock. My hands froze. Henry Whitlock. It was a name I hadn't heard in 5 decades. He was my father's younger brother. The family rogue, the dreamer, the one who'd left Boston at 24 in a blaze of arguments and ambition. I'd adored him as a child. His stories, his mischief, the way he called me Evie and snuck me candy behind my mother's back. But after their falling out, he disappeared from our lives. No one knew what happened to him. No letters, no calls, just silence. And now, he was dead and reaching out to me. I sat down, heart thudding against my ribs. The rest of the letter was clinical. Some estate lawyer in Boston informing me that I had been named as the sole beneficiary of Henry's estate. There would be more details to follow, of course. A phone call, legal papers, executors, and formalities. But one line stood out. Estimated estate value, $38.4 million. I stared at it. $38 million. My breath caught, not in awe, but in something closer to fear, because I knew what wealth could do. I had watched it swallow Danielle whole. Money had torn Henry from my father. Money had turned my daughter into a stranger. And now, it had found me. I placed the letter on the table, smoothed its edges. Then I stood. For a long time, I just looked out the window. The city stretched beyond, still alive, still loud, still oblivious. But in my little apartment, something shifted again. This time, not hope, not shame, but power. And I wasn't going to waste it. I hadn't said his name aloud in more than 50 years. Henry Whitlock. To me, he was always just Uncle Henry, the man who smelled of tobacco and ink, who let me climb trees in my Sunday dress, who once told me that rules were just suggestions written in softer ink. And then one day, he was gone, just like that. My father never spoke his name again. My mother erased his photo from the living room, and I learned early that some silences weren't meant to be broken. Until now. The letter sat on my kitchen table for hours before I gathered the courage to read it again. I made a pot of coffee, cleaned the sink, folded a load of laundry that had been clean for 2 days. Anything to avoid the weight of those sentences. But they stayed, stubborn, real. You are the sole heir to the estate of Henry Whitlock. Estimated value, $38.4 million. Assets include real estate holdings in Boston and New York, including a Tribeca penthouse located at... I read the address 3 times, Danielle and Travis's address. At first, I laughed, a wild, unhinged kind of laugh that bounced off the walls of my apartment and startled even me. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. The very building where I'd been humiliated, now, belonged to me. There was something Shakespearean about it. Poetic, if you believed in justice or karma, or whatever gods watched over 71-year-old women with broken hearts and pearl necklaces. But the laughter faded quickly, replaced by something heavier. Fear. Because I had lived long enough to know, money changes things. People, relationships, families. It had destroyed Henry's bond with my father. It had turned Danielle into a woman who looked me in the eye and told me I didn't belong. I didn't want wealth to become a weapon. I didn't want this to be about revenge. But I also wasn't about to ignore the gift, or the responsibility, that had landed in my lap. 2 weeks later, I was on a train to Boston. The estate lawyer, Mr. Gerard Wexler, was a small man with tired eyes and a tie that looked older than some of his files. But he was kind, efficient, and surprisingly blunt. "Mr. Whitlock left everything to you," he said, pushing a thick file across the polished table. "No conditions, no clauses. He updated his will just 6 months ago." "Why me?" I asked, not meaning to say it aloud. Mr. Wexler looked at me over his glasses. He wrote one sentence in the margin of his final update. "I think you should see it." He handed me a photocopy. There, in Henry's handwriting, still loopy, still bold, were 6 words, "Because she never asked for anything." I pressed my hand to my mouth. All these years he'd remembered. All these decades. While I assumed he'd disappeared into greed and ambition, he'd been watching. Quietly. From afar. I returned to New York with deeds, titles, legal authority over more property than I could comprehend. But, most importantly, I returned with a quiet, growing certainty. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about becoming whole again. I kept my moves small at first. I reached out to Julian, the building manager of the Tribeca property. We met in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe where he sipped black coffee and eyed me curiously. "You're the new owner?" he asked, disbelief tugging at his voice. "Yes," I said, "and I'd like to keep things discreet." Julian was young, sharp-eyed, and polite in a way that didn't feel forced. There was something refreshing about the way he spoke to me, not with pity, not with surprise, but with respect. He didn't ask questions about my age, or why I was suddenly in charge. He simply nodded and said, "Understood, Mrs. Monroe." From that moment, I trusted him. Within a week, I had the tenant files, payment histories, maintenance issues, and there it was, clear as glass. Travis Langford was 3 months behind on rent. Even worse, the unit had been used as collateral for a personal loan, likely to prop up one of his failing startups. He had leveraged the penthouse like a man betting chips he no longer owned. Danielle's name wasn't on the lease, not even as a co-tenant. She had no idea. I sat in my apartment that night, reading through the documents, heart pounding. Not from anger, from purpose. They thought I was weak, disposable, background noise to their curated life. But what they didn't know, what they'd never imagined, was that I now held every key to their castle. Julian called me one afternoon, concern in his voice. "I didn't mean to overstep," he said, "but I noticed Danielle crying in the elevator yesterday. She was alone. Looked lost." Something inside me twisted. She was my daughter, my blood. Even after all she'd done, even after those words that still echoed in my skull, she was still the girl who used to fall asleep with her head in my lap, asking me to hum Moon River. I couldn't protect her then, but I could protect her now. The plan didn't form all at once. It wasn't a scheme or a blueprint. It was more like a slow-burning candle, illuminating pieces of me I thought had gone dark forever. I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. I was a landlord, a landlady, with power, with vision, and soon, with a mission far bigger than revenge. You'd think inheriting millions would feel like fireworks, trumpets, confetti, some great cinematic moment where the world tilted in your favor and never turned back. But when you're 71 and freshly humiliated, Power doesn't arrive like a bang. It creeps in, quiet as breath. And if you're careful, if you're steady, it becomes a weapon no one sees coming. Julian and I met again on a Thursday in a cafe tucked behind an unmarked blue awning in Soho, a place with low jazz, real cream, and the kind of chairs that didn't judge you for sitting too long. He came in wearing a navy peacoat, clipboard under one arm, eyes warm but alert. I liked that about him. He never spoke more than necessary, never performed politeness like Travis did. 2 sets of documents, he said, sliding the folders across. Monthly statements and a list of resident concerns. Buildings overdue for a few plumbing updates. And there's a rental issue. My eyebrows lifted. He tapped one page. Penthouse 4C, Langford. I scanned the column. 3 missed payments. 0 communication. He's saying his funding's delayed, Julian said. Blames venture capital restructuring? I closed the folder and folded my hands. And Danielle? Julian hesitated. She's not on the lease. No tenancy rights. Everything's in Travis's name. So my daughter, in that penthouse she'd once barred me from, had no legal protection. If I wanted, I could have them both evicted with a single document. That kind of power. It didn't thrill me. It terrified me. That evening, I sat in my apartment, lights dimmed, reading through the building files with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Names, dates, service requests, rent histories. A living map of lives stacked one over another in concrete and steel. And there they were, Travis and Danielle. A 12th out of 400-month lie. I wasn't angry. I was resolved. I opened the shoebox. Letters I hadn't touched in years. Michael's handwriting on yellowing paper. Danielle's college updates, still smelling faintly of lavender. One envelope stood out. Her 9th birthday. A homemade card. I love you more than the stars, Mommy. Thank you for always being there. I pressed it to my chest. Being there looks different now, baby. But I'm still here. The following Tuesday, I made my first visit to the building since, well, that dinner. Julian arranged for it to be quiet. Off hours, low visibility. No staff, no cameras. Just me. I wore a soft wool coat, flats, and the same pearl pendant Michael gave me on our last anniversary. Not because I needed luck, because I needed to remember who I was before the silence. Stepping into the lobby was surreal. I had only seen it from the outside. Now it felt like enemy territory. The floors gleamed. The scent of fresh-cut lilies filled the air. Wealth had a smell. It was lemon oil and detachment. Julian greeted me with a respectful nod. Mrs. Monroe. Not Ma'am, not landlady, just Evelyn. And still, respect. He walked me through repair logs, fire safety compliance, even HVAC noise complaints from the 3rd floor. We took the elevator to the rooftop to inspect water damage. The city stretched before us, grey, endless. Looks different from up here, I said. Feels different too, Julian replied. When you're the one who holds the keys. We returned to the lobby just as the elevator chimed, and there she was, Danielle, sunglasses, trench coat, a tote bag filled with groceries, head down, moving fast. She didn't see me. My heart stopped anyway. I stepped behind the lobby pillar, breath lodged in my throat. Julian shifted slightly, instinctively shielding me. Danielle walked past without a glance. Her heels echoed down the hallway until silence swallowed them. I'm sorry, Julian said quietly. I shook my head. She didn't see me. But you saw her, he said. And that was worse. That night, Julian called. I wasn't going to say anything, he began, but I think you should know. I ran into Danielle at Whole Foods this afternoon. Silence. She used food stamps. She looked embarrassed. I didn't answer, because I couldn't breathe. I knew that shame. I'd lived it once, 25 years ago, when Michael got sick. I'd stood in line at the corner market, pretending I forgot my purse so I could abandon a basket I couldn't afford. I knew what it felt like to smile through cracked dignity. Danielle had never known that version of me. And now, she was me. The next morning, I called Wexler's office. "I want direct control over the Tribeca property," I said. "No proxies? No third-party managers?" "Understood," his assistant replied. "Will you be serving notice to any tenants?" I paused. Not yet. Then I hired a private investigator, an older woman named Margot, grey bun, sharper eyes than anyone I'd met in years. "I don't need dirt," I told her. "I need truth." 3 days later, she delivered it in a manila envelope. Travis Langford. Several flagged accounts under different LLCs. One mistress, age 28. Midtown residence. A tech startup hemorrhaging cash. Danielle's name used as a co-signer on 1.2 mitters in loans. I sat alone in the kitchen with the folder open, the kettle whistling long past boiling. He was burning everything down, and Danielle didn't even know she was holding the match. I didn't rage, didn't scream. I planned, like a gardener pruning rot to let light reach the healthy roots. One night, reviewing maintenance requests, I saw a curious line item. New phone line requested, Unit 4C, under Danielle Langford. Purpose: professional inquiries, job search. My eyes blurred. She was trying to get out, trying to become someone else again. Someone who could stand on her own. I reached for her birthday card. "Thank you for always being there." I touched the words. "Sweetheart," I whispered. "You're not alone. There's a silence that comes before collapse. Not a quiet, peaceful kind, but the type that's too clean, too measured, too rehearsed." That was the Langford penthouse. Slick granite counters, scented candles that burned like guilt. Not a book out of place, not a voice raised. Just a frozen, gleaming stillness, like a showroom, like a lie. And underneath it all, I could feel it cracking. Julian updated me weekly now. He wasn't just the building manager anymore. He had become a thread of truth I could hold on to. "Still no payment," he said during one of our meetings at the back corner of the cafe we always chose. "Travis keeps saying wire transfers are delayed. Same excuse." I flipped the page of the folder he brought, showing tenant histories and financial notes. "He hasn't even tried to negotiate," Julian added. "It's like he thinks no one will touch him." I stared at the signature line on the lease. Only one name, Travis Langford. Danielle's absence struck me harder than I expected. "So if something happens to him, she loses everything?" I asked. Julian nodded. "She's a ghost in her own home." The following morning, I asked for a walkthrough of the building. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet observation. Julian led me through a service corridor, dimly lit and humming with old pipes. We passed an HVAC technician taking notes by the electrical closet. As we walked, Julian said softly, "I saw Danielle again. Last night." I turned to him. She was carrying groceries, heavy bags, one split open. She looked exhausted. I didn't speak. "And she used food stamps." The words sat between us like a brick. "I've seen her do it twice now," he added. "She hides the card behind a receipt. Won't meet the cashier's eyes." I closed mine, because I remembered what that shame tasted like. When Michael's hospital bills devoured our savings, and I had to choose between medication or heat. The day I used a SNAP card, my fingers shook so badly I dropped the milk. Danielle had been 15. She thought it was an accident. I let her believe that. And now, she was walking my path. Alone, embarrassed. But she didn't have to. Back home, I opened the old journal I hadn't written in since Michael died. November 12th. Sometimes saving someone means waiting until they realize they're drowning. But I will not let her sink with him. The very next day, Margot, my investigator, called. "Mrs. Monroe, we have something." She placed a manila folder on the table between us at the cafe. Inside, photos, receipts, real estate documents. Travis at Cipriani's, smiling too wide, too close to a woman who wasn't Danielle. Photos from a midtown condo, modern, sleek, recently purchased. A gift, paid in full, signed by Danielle Langford. I felt the blood leave my face. "He used her name," I whispered. "Loan records, too," Margot confirmed. "He's laundering. Failure through her credit. That penthouse is just window dressing now." I stared at the signature again. Danielle's handwriting. Elegant. Naive. He was using her as a shield, a sponsor, a host, and she had no idea. That night I asked Julian to flag Travis's lease. No changes allowed without direct approval. Nothing gets moved, nothing gets hidden. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded. 3 days later, Danielle requested a copy of the building's entry logs. Julian texted me immediately. "She's asking who enters their unit when she's not home. She's starting to suspect something." I put the phone down and stood by the window. This was the moment, the precise second before a woman realizes her life is a script she didn't write, and she wants out. The days blurred together. Danielle began requesting more service forms, light bulbs, appliance checks, small, careful movements. But the biggest shift came when she submitted a maintenance request for a second phone line, listed under her name. Reason: professional inquiries. She was job hunting. She was trying. And I, God help me, I had never loved her more than in that quiet resistance. I decided to act. First, I contacted my attorney and rewrote my will. Half the estate to Danielle, the other half to a new foundation I would build. Housing support for women fleeing abusive or controlling partners. No strings attached. No red tape. I called it the Second Door Fund. "Going public?" my attorney asked. "Not yet," I said. "Let the roots grow in private. The world can meet the tree later." That week, Travis showed signs of fraying. Julian reported him pacing the lobby at midnight, yelling into his phone. The concierge said he came home drunk 3 nights in a row. Danielle wasn't with him. The mask was slipping. And I was almost ready. Then, one final thing. A small envelope, no name, no return address. Inside, the truth. Photos, bank statements, records, all of it, without commentary, without threats, just light. I left it at her door and waited. 2 days passed. No word. Then Julian texted me. She found it. She didn't tell him. She took it with her. She cried again in the elevator. But this time, it wasn't despair. It looked like strength. I turned off the lights that night and sat alone in the dark. Not with sadness, but with stillness. Because the glass wasn't just cracking anymore. It was about to fall. And Danielle. She was already stepping away from the edge. There's something unnervingly satisfying about watching a man like Travis unravel. Not because it's joyful to see someone fall, but because it's justice when that someone has climbed on the backs of others, lied to their face, and called it charm. At first, the unraveling is subtle. A tighter tie, an extra drink at brunch, passive-aggressive jokes that no one laughs at anymore. You start to see the effort behind the performance, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Monday morning. Julian called. He's in the office. he said flatly, pacing, loud, angry. I didn't need context. I already knew what triggered it. The envelope I'd left for Danielle had done its work. The truth had a way of rippling outward, silent but unstoppable. Once she knew, Travis's world, his illusion, began to slide out from under him. I took my time getting dressed. Grey slacks, a pale blue blouse, low heels, no jewellery except my pearl pendant. I wasn't dressing for battle. I was dressing for control. When I stepped into the building's office, I could hear his voice bouncing off the walls. Completely unacceptable. I've been a tenant here for 5 years, and I demand to know who the hell thinks they can. Then he saw me. His breath caught. You? He asked, like I was a glitch in his reality. Yes, I said calmly. Me. He looked between me and Julian, waiting for the punchline. But none came. I stepped behind the desk, sat down. This isn't a joke, Mr. Langford, I said. I'm the new owner of this building, and your lease is now under review. The silence that followed was sharp. His jaw clenched, his posture stiffened like a child caught in a lie. Then he laughed, the kind of brittle laugh men use when they don't know where to aim their power. You bought the building? He scoffed. What did you do? Win the lottery? Cash in a coupon? I slid a folder across the desk. No drama, just facts. 3 months behind on rent, 2 bounced checks, 1 unit illegally leveraged for a private loan, and, most concerning, unauthorized use of your spouse's credit to purchase property. The colour drained from his face. You've been spying on me. No, I said simply. I've been protecting my daughter. He sat down across from me, suddenly unsure whether to beg or bluff. I can fix this, he said. Danielle and we're just going through a tough patch. She's been difficult, emotional. I looked him dead in the eye. She's not emotional. She's exhausted because she's been carrying the weight of your lies. He shifted again, tried one last card. Charm. You're a mother, Evelyn. Surely you understand how hard it is to keep a family together. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. We can handle this privately. I smiled, just slightly. I am handling it privately. That's why you're here and not in court. Then I pulled out the notice. A crisp, legal document. 30 days. Vacate. He stood slowly, jaw tight. You're making a mistake. No, I said. I'm ending one. He stormed out. No more words. But the silence he left behind? It was the first moment in years I felt peace down to my bones. When I first met Travis, years ago, in a quiet wine bar, I tried to believe the best in him. He was polished, confident, charming in that predictable way rich men often are. He called me Mrs. Monroe, and listened just enough to seem engaged. But I remember something now. Something small. That night, when I complimented Danielle's new haircut, she looked to him before responding, and he gave the smallest nod, like permission. That memory haunts me more than any of the others. Wednesday arrived, the day Danielle always took a few hours to herself, lavender latte in Soho, walk through the boutique bookshop, quiet moment on a park bench. Margot followed Travis again. At exactly 11:32 a.m., he was caught on camera, hand on the back of a younger woman, kiss pressed to her neck like nothing else in the world existed. Margot didn't even have to zoom in. Undeniable. At 11:47, Danielle walked past the same cafe, folder in hand. Margot didn't say anything, just gave her the envelope. Danielle stood there for several long minutes, motionless. Then she nodded once, and walked away. Julian texted me late that night. She's here. She asked if you were in. She looks tired, but clear. When the knock came, it was gentle, almost shy. I opened the door. Danielle stood there in jeans, sweater too big for her shoulders, hair loose and flat, like she hadn't slept. "Mom," she whispered, "can I come in?" I nodded. No questions. Just opened the door wider. We sat on the couch. I gave her chamomile tea, like I always had when she was sick as a child. She didn't speak for a long time, just looked around the apartment like it was a museum of a life she'd forgotten. Then, finally, "I think I knew," she said. "Not all of it, but enough." "You weren't ready to look," I replied. I didn't want it to be true. "That's not weakness, Danielle. That's love." She blinked fast, but didn't cry. "I feel stupid," she admitted, "and small, like I let him shrink me for years." I took her hand. "Then let's start growing you back." That night, she stayed. I offered her my bed, but at 2:45 a.m., I woke up to find her curled beside me on the couch, head on my shoulder. She hadn't done that since she was 11. I didn't move. Just let her hold on. Because this time, she wasn't the one scared of thunder. The next morning, as the sun streamed through the kitchen window and eggs sizzled on the pan, she sat across from me in silence. Then, she said 6 words. "I want to file for divorce." I didn't flinch. I nodded, then replied with the words I'd been saving since the day she shut me out. "I've got you. I wasn't there when it happened. I didn't need to be. I had already seen it in my mind so many times. I could have painted it myself. Every movement, every betrayal." Margot called me after, said she stood across the street, camera in hand, heart racing, not because of the photos, but because of Danielle's face. She didn't just see him, Margot told me. She saw everything that came before, the gaslighting, the slow erasure, the lies she swallowed and called compromise. Wednesday, 11:32 a.m., Spring and Green, their favorite cafe. It always looked too perfect. I remember walking by once. The flowers on the tables were fake, but no one noticed. Travis was already seated when Danielle arrived, laughing, relaxed, the kind of man who looked like he had nothing to lose, until he leaned across the table, until his hand slid around the waist of a woman who wasn't his wife, until his mouth found her neck. Margot said Danielle didn't move at first, just stared, like she was waiting for reality to catch up with her instincts. Then her coffee slipped from her fingers, shattered, heads turned. Her scream came next, raw and sudden, like a breath she didn't know she was holding had finally fought its way out. It wasn't fury. It was freedom, finally spoken out loud. She didn't wait to be seen, didn't make a scene. She turned, walked straight to the curb, straight into a cab, straight to the last place that had ever felt like truth. When I opened the door, she was shaking, not from cold, from the collision of grief and clarity. She didn't say much, just looked up at me with eyes that weren't angry, but were wide with something else. Release. "Mom," she whispered, "can I come home?" For a moment, I didn't answer with words. I just opened my arms, and that was all she needed. She slept most of that first afternoon, curled in a corner of the couch, blanket drawn to her chin like armor. I didn't disturb her. I just sat close, quietly knitting, pretending I wasn't watching the daughter I thought I had lost find her way back into the room. When she stirred, it was nearly dark. I made tea. She didn't touch it. Offered soup. She shook her head. "Everything tastes like metal," she whispered, "like I've been swallowing pennies for months." I didn't press. Instead, I tucked her into the guest bed, still made with the same lavender sheets she used to love in college. I kissed her temple, brushed hair from her face. "You're safe now," I told her. She nodded, eyes closed, but a tear slipped from the corner. By morning, she sat straighter, still broken, but beginning to remember she had bones. We made eggs together. She cracked the shells like she was testing her grip on the world again. "He didn't even look sorry," she muttered. "He just stood there, like I was an inconvenience." I didn't say, "He never deserved you." I just said, "Then you know who he is. Finally." That afternoon, she asked to see old photos. We pulled out albums from the hallway closet, her ballet recital at age 6, pink tutu, gap-toothed grin, family trips with Michael, birthdays with homemade cakes and dollar store decorations. Then, prom night. She lingered on that page, her smile frozen next to Travis's much younger face. "I thought he was saving me," she said. "Turns out he just liked me quiet." I watched her stare at that photo until her hand moved. She ripped it out, folded it once, then again, and placed it face down. That evening, we sat by the window as the city lit itself up, like it didn't care who had fallen apart that day. She finally spoke. "He's been chipping away at me for years, but I kept convincing myself I was the one doing the damage, that if I just smiled more, fixed dinner better, stayed quieter, he'd stop looking elsewhere." I looked at her, really looked. Her face, aged not by time but by tolerance. "You don't have to fix anyone anymore," I said. "Just take care of yourself." She nodded slowly. "I want to file for divorce." There it was, a sentence made not of pain, but power. I reached across the table, took her hand. "I'll help you every step." Later that night, we sat in the living room with music playing softly, her old favorite, Norah Jones. "I used to hate coming here," she said, eyes distant. "It reminded me of everything I didn't want to feel. But now, it feels like a place I left a part of myself in." "You never left it," I said. "You just packed it away so you could survive." Before bed, she brought out a notebook. "I need to make a list," she said. "Things I have to untangle. Bank accounts, insurance, the lease." She wrote like someone reclaiming space. Name by name, password by password. One line read, "Tell him I'm not afraid anymore." Another said, "Change the locks." I didn't comment, but I kept the page in my heart like a prayer. Before she turned off the light, she came to my door. "You waited for me," she said, "even when I pushed you away." I smiled. "You're my daughter. I never stopped setting a place for you at the table." She crossed the room, wrapped her arms around me, tighter than ever before. And when she cried, it wasn't just sadness, it was release. That night, as she slept soundly down the hall, I opened my journal. Tonight, Danielle laid down her old life. Not as someone abandoned, not as someone betrayed, but as a woman who finally chose herself. The courthouse smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner, the kind of sterile that tries too hard to cover up years of quiet heartbreak. Danielle stood beside me in the echoing hall, her shoes barely making a sound on the cold marble floor. Her navy slacks were crisp, her white blouse ironed to near perfection, but I could still see the fine tremor in her hands. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was the weight of 1,000 small silences finally breaking open. Her fingers slipped into mine, cold, unsteady. "You don't have to be brave," I whispered. "Just be real." She nodded, her jaw clenched tight. I saw it then, beneath all the exhaustion, the steel. The part of her that had once stood up in ballet slippers and announced she wanted to audition for the lead role, even though she was the smallest girl in class. The fire was still there, just buried under years of trying to survive someone else's version of love. When the clerk called her name, she squared her shoulders and walked forward. I didn't follow. This was hers. She was inside for 27 minutes. In that time, I thought about the first time I held her. A newborn, red-faced and wailing, fists curled like she was ready to fight the whole world. I remembered the way Michael had said, "She's going to break hearts and take names." I hadn't thought then that the first heart she'd have to heal would be her own. When the courtroom doors opened again, she stepped out slowly. There were no tears, just a long, quiet breath, like she had come up for air after being underwater far too long. "It's done," she said, voice steady. I didn't hug her, didn't cry. We just stood side by side, two women who had burned, rebuilt, and chosen not to hide their ashes. That afternoon, we sat across from Henry's attorney in a midtown office filled with thick books and thin patients. He explained trust funds, tax implications, properties still under negotiation. Halfway through, Danielle interrupted. "I want to donate one of the buildings," she said, clear and sure. "Something transitional, for women leaving situations like mine." The attorney blinked. "Excuse me?" "I want to create a space where women don't have to choose between homelessness and staying with someone who breaks them slowly." He turned to me for confirmation. "It's her call," I said. "And it's a good one." What I didn't say was, she just gave me my next reason to keep breathing. That night, we pulled blueprints onto the dining table. She had ideas: a drop-in counselling room, on-site childcare, a closet full of donated clothes, sorted by size and dignity. "I want them to feel like they're arriving," she said, "not escaping." I told her about my plans for the old Soho property, how I'd already begun paperwork for a shelter space there. She stared at me, blinking. "You already—" I smiled. "Great minds." We named it the Whitlock House, after the uncle who left us more than money, after a man who believed in reinvention, who understood what it meant to walk away to build something better. For the first time in weeks, Danielle laughed, the kind that made her eyes crinkle, the kind I thought I'd never hear again. A week later, Travis showed up, outside her new building, arrogant as ever. But this time, Danielle didn't flinch. The security guard handed him a copy of the restraining order. She'd filed it quietly days before. I hadn't even known. She didn't need to tell me. She just needed to act. He didn't come back. Danielle began volunteering at the center before the paint had even dried. She sorted donations with a quiet determination, her hands moving through sweaters and shoes and socks with the kind of reverence reserved for sacred work. "You think we'll actually help people?" she asked once, standing in a room that still smelled of fresh plaster. "I think we already are," I said. And I meant it. A month later, the first woman arrived. She had a baby on her hip and a bruise that hadn't yet faded from her cheekbone. Danielle met her at the door. No judgment, no clipboard. Just a warm blanket, a clean room, and a whisper. "You're safe here." After the woman settled in, Danielle came back to the office and sat beside me. "She didn't thank me," she said. "She doesn't need to," I replied. "She walked through the door. That's more gratitude than most people ever give themselves." Danielle found part-time work again, graphic design at a local firm. Modest pay, but meaningful hours. Every evening she came home exhausted but smiling, with ink on her fingertips and stories about fonts and clients and coffee that tasted like burnt hope. I listened to every word, not because they were groundbreaking, but because they were hers. One night, sitting on the fire escape, we watched the sky go soft with dusk. She leaned her head on my shoulder and asked, "Do you think I'll ever fully come back to myself?" I thought for a long time. "No," I said finally, But I think you'll become someone better, not because he broke you, but because you chose to heal." She didn't speak, but I felt her breath steady. Before bed, she left a folder on my nightstand. Inside was a proposal for the second building. Affordable housing for single mothers, art therapy spaces, a garden on the roof. On the front cover, she had written in small, careful letters, "What we rebuild can be stronger than what we lost." That night, I wrote in my journal, "My daughter no longer hides in shadows. She builds rooms full of light." 3 months passed. Quietly. Steadily. The city changed outfits again, shedding spring for summer, wrapping buildings in golden heat, stretching light into late evenings. But more than the weather had shifted, we had shifted. Danielle laughed more now, still quietly, like it needed permission, but the kind of laughter that filled a room by refusing to apologize for existing. Her back stood straighter. Her voice no longer broke at the mention of Travis. She was whole, in the way broken things can be when mended with care. Not perfect, but stronger at the seams. The Whitlock house was full. 32 women, 32 keys, handed over with quiet reverence. Each key, a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that once read, "I can't stay." They were stories I carried with me, tucked beneath my skin like secret prayers. They reminded me that healing didn't come in loud declarations. It came in beds made with fresh linens, locks that only opened from the inside, and kitchens that welcomed every woman, every time. And then, one afternoon in July, I was asked to speak. The invitation came printed on heavy cardstock, "Annual Gala for Women's Housing Initiatives, honoring Evelyn Monroe for outstanding contribution and community legacy." I almost threw it away, but Danielle placed a hand on mine. "You need to go," she said. "Not because they need to hear you, but because I need to see you stand on that stage." So I went. The ballroom shimmered with soft lights and polished silver. Waiters in black moved like shadows between tables filled with people whose handbags cost more than my old car. I didn't belong, not really, but I didn't flinch either. Because I remembered a different room, months earlier, where I wasn't allowed to sit at a table, where my daughter's husband smiled like a snake and whispered, "You'll be more comfortable in the kitchen." I had clutched Michael's necklace that night until my knuckles turned white. Tonight, I wore that same necklace, polished, proud. Because this was no longer about comfort. This was about presence. The MC tapped the microphone. A hush fell. My name echoed through the ballroom. I stepped onto the stage, heels steady. I hadn't written a speech. I didn't need one. I had lived it. I stood there a moment, letting the silence wrap around me, and then I spoke. "A year ago," I began, "I sat in a kitchen not meant for me. I was told I didn't belong at a table set for power." I looked at the audience. Some shifted. Some held their breath. But I'm here tonight because I realized something important. You don't wait for a seat to be offered. You build a bigger table. Scattered applause. But I wasn't finished. "Healing doesn't begin in courtrooms," I continued. "It begins when someone opens a door. When a woman holds a stranger's baby so she can shower in peace. When a counselor sits with someone through silence. When a hot meal is made without conditions." I paused. "This isn't charity. It's justice in a softer form. Dignity served warm." The applause came louder now, but I only nodded, stepped back from the podium, and let the moment be what it was. Not triumph, but closure. After the ceremony, Danielle found me backstage. She wore a midnight blue dress and a smile that belonged entirely to her. "You did it," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. No, I said into her hair. We did. That evening, back at our building, we hosted tea on the rooftop garden of one of the Whitlock house units. A long wooden table, handcrafted by women in recovery, sat in the centre, chipped in places, crooked on one side, but full. Danielle, now managing part of the centre, had invited 3 new residents to join us, women who had moved in just that week. One of them, Rochelle, sat with her baby asleep on her chest, eyes scanning the skyline like she couldn't quite believe she belonged to it. Another, named Miriam, a retired English teacher with a soft voice, brought lemon cake. I haven't had a dinner with people in 5 years, she confessed, slicing a piece for everyone. Danielle poured tea. Rochelle clutched her cup like it anchored her to the moment. You're safe now, Danielle said gently. No one cried, but we didn't need tears to mark grace. We just needed presence. As dusk deepened, the sounds of traffic faded beneath soft rooftop laughter. I sat back and watched the table, scarred, mismatched, alive, and realized something. This was the revenge. Not rage, not destruction, but this table, these women, this life, rebuilt without apology. I had spent so long trying to be allowed in. Now, I was making space for others. That, I realized, was the real power. Danielle leaned in close. You were never just waiting for me to come home, she said. You were building home for others too. I turned to her, heart full. I didn't lose my dignity in that kitchen, honey, I said softly. I found the courage to build a bigger table. We sat in the silence that followed, not empty, not broken, just full of light. And for the first time in my 72 years, I knew. My story didn't end in exile. It ended in invitation. Sometimes the loudest revenge isn't a scream. It's the sound of a door opening for someone who thought they'd never be welcomed again. It's a quiet rooftop table, shared over tea and silence. It's a woman who was once dismissed to the kitchen, now building homes with her name on the deed. Evelyn Munro didn't burn it all down. She planted something stronger in the ashes. And perhaps that's the most dignified vengeance of all. Not to hurt back, but to heal forward. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after being broken, quietly, fiercely, on your own terms, drop a below or share your story. Someone out there might need it more than you know.